Okay, so we're looking at Shirley Jackson's The Lottery. And this is one of the more interesting short stories you've probably read. Shirley Jackson herself was an interesting person. She didn't live to be an old age. She lived from 1919 to 1965. Mostly she's famous for her short stories. Her most famous work is the one you're reading, The Lottery, which combines a peaceful small-town American setting with a horrific shock ending. The tone of most of her work is odd and macabre, meaning it kind of has this sinister bent to it, sense of impending doom. But it's usually filled with ordinary settings and ordinary characters. So The Lottery was published in 1948 in the New Yorker. It was said to have generated more negative letters than any other story published. And many of the people actually canceled their subscriptions. Readers were offended by the work and the suggestion that evil could be carried out so easily among the common people. And they felt that the stoning was a pointless, arbitrary, violent sacrifice. Some people actually called to see if there was a real town where they could see the lottery. And Jackson herself received over 300 letters. And she said, "I can count only 13 that spoke kindly to me. Even my own mother scolded me and said, 'Dad and I did not care at all for your story. It does seem, dear, that this gloomy kind of story is what all you young people think about these days. Why don't you write something to cheer people up?'" Now, there might have been a little bit of an anti-feminist bent to this, where, if Shirley Jackson had been a man, she might not have received that much of a blowback. She kind of refused to talk about the story, and particularly to try to explain it. She did once say to a journalist, "I suppose I hoped, by setting a particular brutal rite in the present and in my own village, to shock the readers with a graphic demonstration of the pointless violence and general inhumanity of their own lives. But I gather that in some cases the mind just rebels. The number of people who expected Mrs. Hudson to win a Bendix washer at the end would amaze you." So her story is based on an ancient ritual sacrifices. In Athens, Greece, the Athenians believed that human sacrifice promised fertile crops. This was called the harvest sacrifice. You either sacrificed someone in the beginning of the summer to ensure you had good crops, or you sacrificed someone or something at the end of the summer to thank the gods for successful crops. And basically what people would do is they would kind of transfer their sins to a person or an animal, and then sacrificing them, people believe their sins would be eliminated. This is often called scapegoat because a goat was an animal that was particularly used for this. But it certainly began to be used among the Christian religion as part of the Christ storyline. Instead of an animal being sacrificed and having all of humanity's sins put upon it to be eliminated, Christ sacrificed himself with all the sins of humanity placed upon him. So this kind of harvest ritual was the similar ritual sacrifice that Tessie Hutchins occurs, which we can tell by the one villager's remark, "Lottery in June, corn be heavy soon." So again, this is this kind of offering to the gods so that you'll have a good harvest. So again, a scapegoat is a person, group, or thing assigned responsibility or perceived faults of a given society. The term has many roots in the ancient world. In modern time, we often look at the Holocaust as an example of scapegoating, in which 6 million Jews were killed under the direction of Adolf Hitler Hitler played on popular sentiment in his country at the time by blaming Jews for the loss of World War I and for the economic woes of Germany. And he actually started even earlier than that by blaming disabled and calling them useless eaters. And then he moved on to Jews, communists, and homosexuals. And each of them had a role that they played that hurt Germany. But we see it in modern times. We see scapegoating of immigrants right now. Oh, society's unemployment problems isn't because people don't get better education, try to get better jobs, or that companies aren't held accountable to make sure they offer decent jobs in America. No, it's the Mexicans' fault. They come here and steal our jobs. Or during the AIDS crisis, AIDS was known as the gay disease because they were claiming that gays' sinful nature brought about the disease. So historically, the lottery is written in 1948. After World War II, Americans tend to imitate those around them rather than follow their own paths. So there was this group think that was very popular after World War II, with this idea of everybody looking the same and acting the same. And this encouraging of this conformity was, of course, helped by television, and which broadcasts, the same kind of images and, the same shows. There was only 3 networks. So there was a sense of conformity that was presented through television as well. And in politics, Americans feared the spread of communism. We had the Un-American Activities Committee, which blacklisted Hollywood directors, writers, and McCarthy's communist witch hunts. In the story, the townspeople are swept away by the tide of conformity, and the lottery goes ahead as always. They're afraid to change the ritual. They're afraid to change the lottery, even though they say that most other towns have. They're afraid to. So they're afraid to be different. By 1943, news of Nazi concentration camps had reached America. The number of Americans that responded with horror and concern that communities could have stood by and silently allowed the Holocaust to occur. There was also that kind of sense. And Jackson hints at a similar situation in her story when the townspeople are unable to fully question or prevent the lottery practice. In fact, participated in it because everybody was participating. Some biblical allusions. An allusion is when you're referencing another work. And of course, the lottery alludes to the biblical story where Jesus frees an adulterous woman, directing who is without sin to cast the first stone. And then no one throws a stone at her after he makes this proclamation, which we see referenced in the stoning aspect of the lottery. But in the lottery, no one stops. In fact, even Tessa's own family participates. Which brings us to this idea of an empty ritual. At one point they say, because there was always a lottery, the villagers feel compelled to continue the tradition. They focus on its gruesome nature, for they still remember to use stones even after they have forgotten the ritual and lost the original black box. The story might be saying that society tends towards violence instead of society's need for civilized traditions. And this idea of empty rituals becomes problematic. If you can't figure out why you're doing this ritual, then you're not examining what's going on. So mob violence, another important theme. The horrible actions exhibited by groups, such as Mrs. Hutchinson's stoning, do not take place on an individual level. For the individual, such action would be called murder. But the group, there's a sense of being able to hide behind the group. So on a group level, people classify their atrocious acts simply as ritual. So when Mrs. Hutchinson arrives at the ceremony late, she chats sociably with Mrs. Delacroix. But after Mrs. Hutchinson falls victim to the lottery selection, Mrs. Delacroix chooses a stone so large that she must pick it up with both hands. So on an individual level, the two women regard each other as friends, but on the group level, they betray that relationship, satisfying the mob mentality. And this is another reference to kind of what was going on in the Jim Crow South, where with the insurgence of the Ku Klux Klan, individuals that are part of the community would hide behind the robes of the Klan and suddenly have a different voice. There's also a great scene of this kind of behavior in To Kill a Mockingbird. So this is a common theme that we see. So symbolism with it. We have black, which is of course the color of death, mourning, punishment. Some even call it an evil color. The black box is used to draw lots, and the slips of paper have a black mark, pointing out the winner are mentioned too frequently to be coincidental. And having a black mark is kind of an idea of having something done against you. So a black box could be a symbol of a coffin, an evil secret hidden away. The black spot on the paper could be a sin. A black mark on one's record is negative. It could mean being unclean. Back to the black box. It is old. The paint is peeling. The wood is splintered. This condition reflects the fading of the tradition in the village, as well as the villagers questioning the lottery in this village. So the box being so old and unkept kind of shows how this ritual is starting to lose favor. But they won't replace the box just like they won't stop the lottery. So even though it's losing favor, they're not ready to give it up. So the lottery itself symbolizes any number of social problems that we blindly continue even though they're outdated. The setting, with no specific time or place indicated, this is kind of an any town USA. And the contrast of the town with the ritual helps build up suspense. And it's a small community, and it's a family-based community, rather than being this kind of empty big city life. This is a place where everybody knows your name. Which gives us the names. Some of these names are very symbolic. We've got Summers, which is the season of summer associated with youth, strength, growth, prime of life, warmth, leisure, prosperity, happiness, blooming, blossoming. And don't forget, our ritual that the stoning is about is a ritual to bring about a good harvest. So it would happen in the beginning of the summer. Graves, another name that's used in the book, in the short story, which is usually an ominous sound. Obviously could reference an actual grave, the place where you bury a body. It also means serious. Critics have said that Jackson creates balance by having Mr. Summers and Mr. Graves share in the responsibility of the ritual. Life brings death, and death recycles life. Summer being symbolic of life and beauty and rebirth, and graves being a sign of death. So a parable. Parable is a story that usually uses a lot of symbolism and oftentimes tells a religious-based tale. Many believe the lottery to be a modern-day parable, which is a story, again, that presents a moral lesson through characters who represent ideas. The focus in the parable is not to develop the character or other typical plot elements. You are not told the lesson of the parable. You're supposed to be able to figure out what it is. We're almost done. Themes. There's acts of violence, hatred, murder are not acceptable just because many people participate. Society is reluctant to reject outdated traditions, ideas, rules, laws, and practices. People are not always all good. People are not all good or all evil, but often a mixture of both. And good people can do evil acts. Horrifying acts of violence can take place anywhere at any time and then can be committed by the most ordinary people. Following the crowd can have disastrous consequences, and an unexamined life is not worth living. And there's a lot more themes and ideas that can be applied to this story. So I'm sure you can come up with more on your own. Alright? And hopefully you will, as we hear you talk about the setting in this one. And also keep it in mind for our paper project, in which you're going to be looking at different aspects: character, setting, plot, point of view, and so on. Alright.